Last month, a fiery retrograde Mars delivered shocking turnarounds in war and politics across the world. But this is the Pluto in Aquarius era, and while strange things are happening on the ground, even stranger things are happening in the skies. We're seeing a massive wave of sightings of what are being described as mystery drones around Air Force bases in the UK and across the United States. The authorities seem to be either unwilling or unable to do anything about these craft. They say they don't know what they are, but can that be true? Something very, very odd is happening. But what comes next? Well, Mars will continue to run red hot and retrograde in January, but early in the month it will return to the lunar domain of Cancer, marking a shift in the way we're feeling its energy. With Mars in the sign of the nation, the clan, the home and the family, expect tension and conflict between ethnic groups or racially motivated protests and violence. And with the Sun joining Pluto in Aquarius, expect more revelations that upend our understanding of reality and the brave new world under construction right now. We can also expect more shocks in the Middle East and around the incoming presidency of Donald Trump, whose inauguration looks like it might be affected by these challenging martial energies. We're moving now into the more difficult astrology of the 2020s, and things are going to get wild from here. Welcome to another World Astrology Report monthly forecast. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and let's get into this. As usual, we're going to begin by looking back at recent events and the astrology that signified them. Pluto spent December in the first degree of Aquarius. This is a hot degree because it was where the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn took place in December 2020, coinciding and signifying the rollout of the COVID-19 jabs. And so, in last month's forecast, I said we should be ready for revelations about the pandemic, and that's exactly what we saw. On December the 2nd, the US's House of Representatives Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis issued its final report on the pandemic after 2 years of research. And it came to a host of conclusions that have had so-called conspiracy theorists everywhere saying, "We told you so." It concluded that the virus likely emerged as a lab leak, that lockdowns did more harm than good, and that mask mandates didn't work, among other things. And on December the 6th, a federal judge ordered that the FDA should publicly disclose more information underpinning its authorization of COVID-19 vaccines. This could have massive implications for how we understand what happened during the pandemic episode. But there was so much more last month, not least the huge wave of sightings of drones and strange objects in the UK, New Jersey, and indeed across the US and the world. We'll talk more about this later, but I've also put out a few videos on the subject of UFOs, like this one and this one that you might want to check out later. Pluto in Aquarius has been described by countless astrologers as the power to the people transit. Pluto entered that sign on November the 19th, and in the United States, this transit appears to have started with a literal bang, with the cold-blooded assassination of Brian Thompson, CEO of one of the largest health insurers in the US. The killing has led to an outpouring of rage by Americans disgusted with the unfairness of the country's healthcare system. With Mars stationing retrograde in dramatic, attention-grabbing Leo, there was a sense of theatricality to this story. The words delay, deny, and depose were found etched on the bullet casings that killed Thompson, and the alleged killer, Luigi Mangione, was arrested in a McDonald's, perhaps a symbolic nod to blue-collar America, and he was carrying a manifesto attacking the healthcare industry. There's a very clean and clear Pluto in Aquarius narrative here. Indeed, it's almost a bit too clean, perhaps suspiciously so. And I'd advise caution here. If we look at the chart for the moment of the assassination, we see something that I think is quite telling. The most angular planet is Neptune, tightly conjunct the IC, one of the 4 powerful angles of the chart. This one symbolizing the foundations or origins of the event. Neptune signifies confusion and obfuscation, among other things. This suggests to me that there's more to this story than meets the eye, and there may be some deception at work here. And last month, we saw stark evidence that Mars retrogrades are no joke. This was made clear by events that took place across the globe. And if there's one phrase that came to my mind watching the events of early December, it's this: the Empire strikes back. If you're enjoying this video so far, then please do click the like button down there and show some support for this channel. And do consider subscribing if you haven't already and you want to make sure to catch more of the show. You might also want to consider signing up as a member of World Astrology Report, which gives you access to all sorts of exclusive content, including long-form live streams like my recent 2025 forecast, and extended versions of all my regular videos, including this one, in which we dive deeper into the techniques and subject matter. Membership prices are going up in January, but if you sign up now, your fees will be locked in forever at the current rate. And members get 20% off consultations with me. I still have slots available, so if you want me to look at your chart, well, get them while they're hot. Now, we saw some remarkable events across the world coinciding with this Mars retrograde, and I think we need to take some more time to digest this transit because it will be continuing through January and well into February. We saw reversals and collapses having to do with central figures, particularly world leaders in places that resonate to the sign of Leo. About a month before the retrograde, with Mars already slowing down to station, the government of Olaf Scholz in Germany collapsed. On December the 3rd, the president of South Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol, attempted to declare martial law. That shock move led to outrage in that country and moves to impeach him. On December the 4th, the French government collapsed. On December the 6th, the very day Mars stationed, a court in Romania annulled the results of a presidential election after a right-wing candidate won, supposedly as a result of Russian interference. And there have also been protests in Georgia attempting to overturn the results of an election won by another pro-Russian candidate, echoing the events in Maidan in Ukraine in 2014. Almost precisely. Mars is also a planet of disease and pestilence. And with that in mind, we saw the outbreak of what's being described as a, quote, unknown disease that is causing flu-like symptoms in the Democratic Republic of Congo that has apparently killed dozens of people. Last month, I did say to watch out for new disease outbreaks. But the biggest shock of all came in Syria, when rebels fighting against the Syrian government managed to cause the regime of Bashar al-Assad to fall 13 years after the beginning of protests against his rule during the Arab Spring. There's often a retrospective aspect to retrogrades, a return to themes from the past. Hardly anyone was thinking about the Syrian civil war until all of a sudden Mars stations retrograde and Assad's government falls. The Assad family has run Syria for more than 50 years, yet it collapsed almost overnight. Now Israel is gobbling up Syrian territory. If it's correct to say that the West is at war with Russia, well, this Mars retrograde seemed to signify the West turning the tables on Russia in multiple theatres. The sign of Leo also signifies celebrities as well as children. It seems that a growing number of celebrities in the US are being implicated in the Diddy sexual blackmail affair, the latest being Jay-Z, who's been accused of raping a 13-year-old with Diddy back in the year 2000. But each sign of the zodiac, including Leo, also points to particular places in the world. In last month's forecast, I showed how Leo points to this section of the world, which includes a lot of East Asia and Australia. And we did indeed see significant events in South Korea. We also saw a big ratcheting up in the trade war between China and the US. On December the 2nd, the US launched another crackdown on China's semiconductor industry by banning exports to 140 Chinese companies. The next day, China responded by banning exports of several critical minerals with military applications to the US. But so much of what happened at this retrograde station happened in other parts of the world beyond this particular region. You might think that points to the limits of the technique of geodetic equivalence, but actually there's more to this technique than what I've talked about on the channel so far. And in the extended version of this video, available for World Astrology Report members, I explain how nearly all the major events we saw at this Mars retrograde happened in regions of the world pointed to using geodetic equivalence. We'll get into this in a bonus section for members at the end of the members-only version of this video. So that's enough Mars retrograde. We're going to take a step back into December now, because that month actually saw 2 new moons, and the second of them in Capricorn will be governing the month of January, so we need to look at that now. On December the 30th, we'll see a new moon in the sign of Capricorn. Yes, I know this is a January forecast, but this new moon will be in effect over January, and maybe, just maybe, I made my December forecast video while Mercury, the planet of astrologers, was severely debilitated in Sagittarius, and I forgot to mention it. The image of Capricorn is that of the sea goat, a strange chimerical creature. a goat with the tail of a fish. This strange beast symbolizes the emergence of the spirit from the ocean of consciousness into the material world. And it points towards Capricorn's desire to climb the ladder. Capricorn builds concrete structures in the world and strives to take advantage of opportunity in order to further itself in mundane reality. New moons are new beginnings. This new moon signifies a fresh start in the Capricorn whole sign house of your chart, a part of your life where Saturn's slow and steady influence holds sway. Perhaps Capricorn is your 9th house and you have a reverence for spiritual tradition, or perhaps it's your 2nd and you are responsible and diligent with your money. In the wider world, a new moon in Capricorn signifies new beginnings in areas like big business, banking, politics, mining, the land, and construction. But an example always helps to understand these things. Last year's Capricorn new moon came on the 11th of January 2024. If we look at the astro map to see where this moon was on the powerful angles, we see this vertical line running through France, which tells us that the new moon was on the midheaven in France when it went exact. And if we look at the chart for this new moon set for Paris, that's exactly what we see. There it is, tightly conjunct the MC. And what happened in France at that time? Well, this was the beginning of the 2024 French farmers' protests, which began on January the 16th, just a few days after the new moon. Now, it always pays to look at what the planet ruling a moon is doing, and of course the ruler of Capricorn is Saturn, planet of limits and restriction. At the time of last year's new moon, Saturn was in Pisces, where it still is today. Saturn in Pisces signifies the establishment of rules and limits to things like global trade and migration and flow. Among the things the French farmers were protesting against was a free trade agreement between the EU and the Mercosur countries. See how that works? Now, let's return to this January's Capricorn new moon, which is once again ruled by Saturn in Pisces. If we look at the astro map, we can see this new moon will be rising in East Asia, highlighting places like Indonesia, the Philippines, the Korean Peninsula, and Japan, and the South China Sea. I wonder if we might see news there about trade blockages, embargoes, or big business deals. If we add a Mars line to our map, we see it running through the Caucasus and the Middle East, so we can likely expect violence in those parts of the world. I'm mindful of the recent events in Syria and Georgia and the potential for violence there this month. And unfortunately, as well as being retrograde, there's another reason why Mars is so hot right now. It's close to an opposition with Pluto. On January the 3rd, retrograde Mars will make an exact opposition to Pluto. This is the second of 3 exact oppositions that the war planet will make with the body named for the Lord of the Underworld. Mars and Pluto have been close to opposition for the past 2 months. So really, this whole period has been characterized by this combination of planets. And to be frank, these are difficult configurations. Pluto tends to drive things to extremes and to signify literal and metaphorical journeys to the underworld. Mars-Pluto can signify acts of extreme violence that explode into view, as well as covert warfare, where the action is hidden below the surface of things until it isn't. Expect an upsurge in such events at the start of January. But we should also consider the current 2-year cycle of Mars and Pluto, which takes us back to their last conjunction, which came on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2024. At this time, US officials began to make noise about the Russians supposedly planning to put nuclear weapons in space. At the Mars-Pluto waxing square, in June, the Russians sent a fleet, including a nuclear-powered submarine, to Cuba, prompting accusations that they were trying to invoke the Cuban Missile Crisis and implicitly threaten the US. This Mars-Pluto cycle is signifying nuclear threats and posturing involving the US and Russia. And in November, with the planets close to their opposition, we saw a return to this theme. On November the 19th, Vladimir Putin signed a decree allowing Russia to use nuclear weapons in response to conventional attacks by a non-nuclear state supported by a nuclear power. And the West gave Ukraine permission to use long-range missiles against Russia, and Russia responded by attacking the city of Dnipro in Ukraine with a new kind of supersonic intercontinental ballistic missile, the Oreshnik. This was also a message against the West. So it seems this Mars-Pluto opposition period will see more fears and threats around the use of nuclear weapons, and all this will likely continue. Mars and Pluto won't make their third and final opposition until April 2025. And some are pointing out that it may be no coincidence that we're seeing this huge wave of sightings of what are being called mystery drones, just as the threat of nuclear weapons use has been ratcheted up higher than it's been in decades. There's a long and well-documented history of connections between the UFO phenomenon and nuclear technology. Indeed, the modern UFO arguably appeared for the first time around the time that the first nuclear weapons were used. Incidentally, I'm on the fence about what these mystery drones are, which have been seen at Air Force bases in the UK holding nukes, and since then in New Jersey and other parts of the US. Clearly, something very strange is happening, but I'm not sure I believe that the military doesn't know what these craft really are. Something to bear in mind is that the UFO phenomenon, meaning an otherworldly force of some kind, is real, but the governments of the US, Russia, China, and perhaps some other states may possess their own secret craft with UFO-like capabilities. It's long been feared that certain parties might use a fake threat of a UFO invasion to usurp democracy and assume total control of society. I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but anything is possible as far as I'm concerned, and it's something to bear in mind. And I can't help but note that all this is happening at a time when Donald Trump, who has faced at least 2 recent assassination attempts, is preparing to take control of the US government once again. It seems at least possible, or maybe even likely, that we're seeing this happening right now precisely because of that change in administration. As I said in this video, these are Saturn-Neptune times, and we all need to be very careful about the narratives we choose to believe right now. They'll tend to mix fact and fiction. But to return to this Mars-Pluto opposition, if you're wondering how to use this energy yourself, well, I'll say this. This is a hard energy to use productively because it has a tendency to signify volcanic eruptions of martial energy. Trying to completely repress these feelings is probably not a good idea because it's that repression that leads to their explosive expression. You might wish to find outlets for strong feelings over this period, such as intense exercise. That said, there's something else happening in January that will be much easier to handle. Venus is moving into Pisces. On January the 3rd, Venus will enter Pisces, where it will remain until it leaves for Aries on February the 4th. And this is good news. Venus, the planet of unification, is exalted in Pisces, and it has a lot more power than normal to enact its agenda. And her agenda, in general, is a pleasant one. Venus is the planet of unification and governs the forces that bring disparate elements together. And so she governs attraction, beauty, aesthetics, and love and pleasure. In Pisces, the mystical sign of universal flow, she finds beauty, well, almost everywhere. Venus in Pisces finds it easy to get carried away by the dream of love, which almost becomes a kind of mystical experience. Around the middle of the month, on January the 15th, Venus in Pisces squares Jupiter in Gemini. This looks like a very pleasant moment when the Venusian experience of sensual pleasure is inflated and elevated by Jupiter's expansive influence. But be careful not to get too carried away. Things will come back down to earth again soon because on January the 19th, Venus conjoins Saturn. Venus-Saturn contacts tend to be difficult for matters of the heart. They can signify times when we don't feel worthy of love, or when we feel distant from loved ones, or even lonely. But Venus has more power than Saturn in Pisces and can lighten the planet of limits and restrictions up. So this might be a good time to lovingly establish a boundary in a relationship, or to point our creative energies towards the Saturnian, things that are ancient or tinged with melancholy. But with all that said, this will really be Mars's month. And early on, it makes a shift that will change the feel of this retrograde. On January the 6th, Mars will retrograde back into the Moon's domain of Cancer. Now, Mars in Cancer is not a happy Mars. It's traditionally held to be in the state of fall in this sign. Cancer is the sign of bounded spaces of identity, such as the home or the nation. These are meant to be safe spaces in which we can really be ourselves and allow our true feelings to flow and find easy expression. But the warrior planet Mars doesn't do so well in these environments. Emotionally charged actions are often unskillful or unwise, and Mars can feel out of place, irritated, or restrained in Cancer. The lowest expression of Mars in Cancer is aggression or violence in the home. The highest is the fight for those we care for or those who can't fight for themselves. But what does this shift mean for the wider world? Well, Cancer is clannish. It signifies the national family and the family of the ethnic group. So expect an uptick in ethnic violence with Mars in Cancer, particularly as a result of the shifts we saw when Mars stationed retrograde. It's easy to imagine how this might play out in places like Syria, but I also wonder if there could be protests and violence organized around racial lines in the US. The US's chart is Cancer heavy. Its sun is found in that sign, and I expect it will feel this transit strongly. This difficult Cancerian Mars energy will receive a boost around January the 13th, when we'll see a full moon in Cancer. Full moons are always moments when emotions run high, and this one will be particularly volatile. It's just a few degrees from Mars, but its closest aspecting planet is Uranus, planet of shocks and surprises. So do tread carefully around this time. I think we're going to be feeling much more sensitive than normal and liable to feel hurt or slighted, particularly in Cancerian protective spaces. Deep breaths and compassion will help here. This Mars in Cancer may also make its presence felt during a key event for the United States, the inauguration of President Trump on January the 20th. The event will begin at 12 p.m. on that day in Washington, D.C., which gives us this chart with 14 degrees of Taurus rising. What's difficult here is that Mars will be almost exactly conjunct the IC, one of the four powerful angles of the chart. I do wonder here about whether there'll be some kind of violence, pain, or agitation going on domestically in the US while the inauguration takes place. Mars in Cancer suggests the possibility for strong, emotionally charged violence connected with themes of the family, the nation, or belonging. I could see there being aggressive attempts to take the shine off Trump's inauguration here. But let's rewind a little, because on January the 19th, Aquarius season begins. On January the 19th, the Sun will enter Aquarius, marking the beginning of the astrological month allotted to the sign of the outsider, the inventor, the genius, and the societal architect. When the Sun enters Aquarius, we've reached the middle third of the winter season. In the northern hemisphere, we're still very much in the part of the year when darkness has the edge over light. But the length of the days is steadily growing and the nights are retreating. And so, where Capricorn is beholden to the past, in Aquarius, as the light grows, our orientation turns decidedly towards the future. Aquarius is a fixed air sign ruled by Saturn. Both Aquarius and Pisces are visionary signs, but where Pisces' vision is inspired by faith and the spiritual world beyond, Aquarius' vision concerns the world we actually live in. It yearns to remake society, and it clings to its vision tenaciously. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, never argue with an Aquarian. Aquarius is also the sign of the stranger, those at the margins of society. If Leo is the sign of those at the center, the sign of royalty, then Aquarius is the sign of the outsider looking in with a vision for how the world could be improved. Now, when the Sun enters Aquarius, it will quickly conjoin Pluto, which has just begun its 20-year transit through this sign. The Sun illuminates and trains the light of consciousness on the world, so look out for news around January the 21st that gives us insight into our new Aquarian reality. And on January the 29th, we'll see a new moon in Aquarius. This is a new beginning in the Aquarian whole sign house of your chart, part of your life where the themes of outsiderdom, foreigners, invention, technology, and humanitarianism can hold sway. Remember that Pluto is in Aquarius now, and so this part of your life is set to be transformed and most likely empowered, although there may be a death and rebirth process that needs to happen before that can take place. Watch out for what happens around the time of this new moon, because it should give you some insight into what these changes will look like. And in the wider world, look out for news here about new technologies, systems, and visions of the future here, particularly those that will revolutionize trade, transport, and communication. The astromap is highlighting the east coast of the US and the UK, among other places. It's interesting that they've been the focus of these mystery drone sightings. Could we see more developments on this theme around this time? Unfortunately, the Mars line in the chart for this moon looks to be signaling an uptick in violence in eastern Ukraine and the Middle East over the month ahead. So we're almost finished with our forecasting, but there's one last thing, which is the direct station of the Promethean awakener of the planetary pantheon, Uranus. On January the 30th, Uranus, the planet of individualism and freedom, will station direct in the 24th degree of Taurus. And so in the latter half of the month, if you have important natal placements in the last decan of the fixed signs, you might feel an urge to do things differently or break free from limitations that prevent you from being yourself in some way. Someone who's very likely to feel this Uranus station is Donald Trump, whose midheaven, the part of the chart signifying his career, public reputation, and actions and role in the world, is very close to the exact station point. In the wider world, Uranus's transit through Taurus since 2018 has seen disruption in the areas of food, money, and shelter, with the rapid growth of apps that allow individuals to experience restaurant cooking at home, to be their own bank, and to turn their residence into a hotel. Uranus's transit through Taurus has also seen significant disruption in this part of the world, with big conflicts breaking out in Ukraine, Israel, and Sudan, among other places. I think that Uranus's direct station is probably going to bring yet more disruption and surprising developments, and quite probably violence, to the Middle East. The direct station will be happening conjunct the Sun in the chart for Israel, and if we convert Uranus's position to its geodetic equivalent, which is 53 degrees east, we see another indication that the station has implications for the Middle East. The line lands very close to Tehran. I think we can expect explosive developments involving Israel and Iran at this time. Saudi Arabia and Yemen and the UAE could also be implicated. So that's it for this month's forecast. In the extended version of this video, available to members of worldastrologyreport.com, we're going to dig deeper into geodetic equivalence, a technique that can help to pinpoint where in the world astrological transits are going to manifest. You can watch that video by signing up at worldastrologyreport.com. Otherwise, I wish you a fantastic month, and I'll see you again on YouTube very soon.